Hey everybody, welcome back. This is Mystic Games. Today we're going to be talking about Beast Minis. We're going to go over the leaders, then the spells per normal, and then each of the units, and what I think about them, what I think about their talents, how you should be using them, that kind of thing. So we're going to start with Charlog here. I'm sorry, I got to figure out how to turn my cursor on. The reason I don't load into the image is because there's like 100 gajillion ads on the page and it causes a super amount of lag. So I usually just essentially use it on my other screen so I can tell you guys what's going on, so you're not getting bombarded with ads on top of the images here. But Charlog's your first leader. If you know anything about the game, she randomizes your mini cost. So all the mini costs in your deck gets randomized every time you drop a mini. If the mini costs 1 and you have a mini that costs 3 in your deck, the 3 cost might get swapped with the 1 cost, vice versa, whatever. That's kind of what her ability is for using her deck. She deals percentage damage. She essentially roots an enemy when she shoots her little beam on them and holds them in place, which is nice for control. In herself, she is a cheap mini. She only costs 2 gold, which is nice. Her abilities, or talents, I should say, are Carnivorous Mist, which deploy cost reduced by 1. That just makes everything, well, it just makes her cheaper, which makes everything cheaper. Because it makes it, instead of a 2 cost, a 1 cost being rolled into your deck list. The next one is Nature's Grasp, which is roots 2 additional nearby targets, but deals half damage. That just makes Charlog more of an AoE fighter, but what it does is if you have a lot of melee coming at you, you can actually hold them in place, and they can't really do anything, and they will just eventually die to Charlog. And then you have Spirit Passage, which minis played for 5 gold or more gain a level and deploy in stealth. That one used to be used very often, but doesn't seem to be used as much as it used to be. Most people like Carnivorous Mist, and they try to make relatively cheap cost decks with like 1 big mini or 2 big minis in it, and then everything else being very low to try to cycle out the higher cost minis for cheap. The issue is eventually that cost comes around. But yes, Carnivorous Mist is generally the most used talent, reducing costs by 1 on her, and then adding, a relatively cheap cost deck allows you to get things out very quick and for a discount in a sense. She's generally used for control, and honestly, out of all the beasts, I think she has some niche uses, but she's probably one of the weakest leaders. I don't think she gets used as much as the others. But we'll go into that. So I think she has her uses. She's kind of niche. She does have ranged, which is significant comparatively to the others that they just don't have ranged. But yeah, that's pretty much what she does. Interesting mini, interesting ability. Next we're going to talk about Hager. I actually looked at the Null Brute because they're pretty similar. Hager is a 4 cost leader. What he does is, his special ability is that every time you summon him, he gains 35% movement and 35% attack speed. He has a cleaving attack, and he's a tanky boy, so he has a good amount of health. He's good at hitting a lot of enemies at once. Generally, he's going to be used as your tank in your deck, so you won't usually need another tank unless you choose to have one. He's generally going to be the tank for your deck. The only issue with him, in my opinion, is that he doesn't have armored and he doesn't have resistance. Normally you want your tank to have one of the 2 buffs naturally, and then you can usually put a fairy dragon or a shaman in your deck to negate the other one to make him a very tanky boy. Hager would take 2 units to make him a tanky boy. Normally I choose Frostwolf Shaman with him, but you can switch it out for Fairy Dragon in certain fights where you know you're facing a lot of elemental damage. But he's essentially, you drop him, he gets stronger, he keeps getting stronger, he keeps getting stronger. And that's kind of the purpose, is that he is going to kind of be your main almost damage dealer slash tank. So his talents are Ham Hock, which is every time you deploy him, he gains 30% health. I believe this only goes up to 30%. Also, with his 35% that I mentioned earlier, that stacks 3 times as well, I believe. It won't go beyond. So you also have Fatal Frenzy. On death, he Bloodlust nearby beast. That would probably be better if it was Bloodlust everybody, but I can see uses with Bloodlusting the beast around you if you make a very beast-heavy deck with him. And then his other one is Spoiled Meat, which is he gains poison, which is actually not bad, because hitting poison with everything and then gaining attack speed, it means you're going to be able to put a lot of stacks of poison, which means you could do a poison deck with Hogger, and it would probably work out for you pretty well. But most people use Ham Hock. I would argue that probably Spoiled Meat's better than Fatal Frenzy, but I could see Fatal Frenzy having some niche uses. Spoiled Meat is like almost, you're probably going to be building a more poison-heavy deck around it, where Fatal Frenzy is you're going to build a beast-heavy deck. The issue is sometimes you don't always want a ton of beasts in your deck, and I see that being more niche than making a poison deck. Poison tends to be really useful in general, and I could see making a deck around poison using Hogger's Spoiled Meat as additional poison stacks. Alright, moving on to Old Murk-Eye, which is our Murloc here, and I'm a big fan of Murlocs. He's a ranged mini as well. He also AoEs slightly if they're within like a relatively close range. The eel that he throws will bounce. He deals elemental damage, and he's very fast. When you drop him for 5 seconds upon dropping him, any gold spent will summon 1 Murloc per gold. So you drop him for 4 gold, and then you usually want to try to have almost your 6 gold saved up pretty much, or at least be at 6 gold. So you're probably going to want to be 9.5 gold when you drop Old Murk-Eye. And then you're going to spam units that are going to maximize the golds. Normally getting 7 gold, you can usually pull off 7 extra Murlocs with them if you plan it right. And that's generally what you're going to try to do for Old Murk-Eye, and then send a bunch of ranged support behind him. So for talents, he has a couple of them that are interesting. Marathon of Murlocs is the most widely used. That's just makes the 5 seconds I was talking about earlier become 10 seconds. So you just get more time to create more Murlocs. That being said, how much are you actually getting out of that? You're probably gaining 2 gold in that 5 seconds, I would say, at best. And that means you actually have to have a mini that maximizes it. So it requires more careful planning, and I feel like when I used to use it, because it used to be one of my favorites, it wasn't as useful as I thought it would be. Also, Murlocs are very, very easy to kill with like AoE spells. So if you summon a lot of times the computer will just AoE, like hit them with Chain Lightning and just kill them all. Tip of the Spear is the other one that he has. Tide Hunters now spawn at his location instead. That's actually kind of a detriment, because instead of spawning at your base, they spawn at him, which just makes him easier to hit with spells. So I would say that's probably more of a detriment. You'd probably want to use Marathon of Murlocs more than that one. And then you have Electric Eel. Attacks briefly stun enemies. The Electric Eel does bounce, and having a stun on a relatively fast attacking unit is pretty good. Old Murk-Eye can kind of hold something, I don't want to say hold it in place, but he can do a very good job locking something down for the most part. So normally I either play with Electric Eels or I play with Marathon of Murlocs. Tip of the Spear is kind of like a weaker version of Marathon of Murlocs in my mind. Normally you play Old Murk-Eye in like cheaper decks, or you play like cheaper cards around him with like maybe Prowler as a tank, throw in some Harpies or like Angry Chickens to get some cheap things, maybe Raptors. But yeah, Quillboar's generally pretty decent too, because you can use Quillboar to, you know, like burrow up behind while your whole wave's coming to turn units around to shoot the Quillboar instead of the giant clustered army that's coming, which will sometimes save them from AoE people like the Pyromancer. He's a solid unit. Just make sure that you understand that the Murlocs and himself are pretty weak, and they are easy to kill. So you need to make your deck around protecting Old Murk-Eye and the Horde to an extent. Obviously, they are expendable, but I'm just saying, don't... If you put all your money, like you drop all these minis and then they just get AoE'd to death, it kind of defeats the purpose. So you just gotta be aware of that. And the computer will do that. So, Old Murk-Eye has his uses. I like him I like Hager the most generally, but he sometimes is better. Like, I switch between these two a lot. Charlog is very niche, and I do enjoy Charlog, but there's... I don't use... It's not my choice of beast. Normally, I normally prefer Hager or Old Murkai personally. Next, we're going to talk about Polymorph. It's the only spell that beasts get. It is actually relatively good. Again, it's a niche use spell, but what it does is it turns everything into sheep in an area for normally about 6 seconds. It gains 0.5 seconds if you have level advantage, or it loses 0.5 seconds if you don't have level advantage. So having level advantage is preferred when using Polymorph. If you don't have level advantage, you're not gaining the full power of the Polymorph. The best talent is generally Golden Fleece, which is whenever you polymorph a group, one of them becomes a golden sheep, and when you kill it, you gain 1 gold back. Essentially, it just makes polymorph 2 gold instead of 3 gold. You're just getting your money back, essentially, somewhat. The next one is Exploding Sheep. Killing a sheep damages nearby enemies. That has its uses, because you can like do a chain reaction and start just clearing things very well. And then you have Stable Transfiguration. It makes the sheep last twice as long, but they regenerate health very quickly. I feel like Stable Transfiguration probably could have been just extended time by 1.5 times longer, and then remove the regeneration, and it would probably be better. That being said, Golden Fleece is generally the one most players use that I've seen. Exploding Sheep can have its niche uses, and Stable Transfiguration, I guess, has its use, but there's just, if you're going to be using that, I feel like there's better spells to be used. So I would normally say Golden Fleece, and then maybe Exploding Sheep. But it is very good in certain raids. It can be used to great effect against the Lava Elemental in the raid. So I do recommend the mini. So now we're going to jump into all the little beast minis. We have a lot of the beasts are about swarming and squad formations. Some of them are very, very useful, and some of them are not so useful. We're going to jump in and talk about the Angry Chicken first, and then we're going to go right down the list. So I'm going to pop open my tabs, starting with the Angry Chicken. Now, I do like the Angry Chicken. It's easy to clear with spells, but it does have good uses. It's very good against like a Molten Giant. If you drop Angry Chickens against a Molten Giant, they will eat the Molten Giant very well. They do a good job at slowing him down, tanking his hits, and just dealing a lot of damage to him. But let's go into why they are so good. So they're a 2-cost mini. It summons, I want to say it's 8 chickens. And they're made to overwhelm enemies. So like overwhelming tanks, like I said, the Molten Giant is a good one in particular. AoE tanks do counter them because they will swipe like Abominations and Fire Elementals. But anything that single targets, like Baron Rivendare or anything like that, will generally lose to Angry Chickens one-on-one. And for 2 cost, that's a good usage. They're very fast, so they can run to a tower very quickly, take minimal losses. So they're pretty decent. My favorite talent form is Furious Fowl, which means they gain fury when attacking, which means the more they hit, the faster they attack. Essentially, it's like a kind of like a bloodlust in a sense. They also have Sacrifice, which is nearby beast allies can consume the chickens to heal themselves. That one has its uses, but there are just other ways to heal that are probably a little bit nicer. Like Holy Nova, in a sense, would be a probably better way to heal. Plus, you can get some good talents on there, like I spoke about in my human video, that make it more useful than using Sacrifice. And then you have Walking Crate, which deploys a protective crate, and when the crate gets destroyed, the chickens emerge. Again, has its usage, but normally Furious Fowl is the way to go with the chickens. And that's how I would use the chickens if I were you. Again, used for swarming towers and big tanks. If you ever are having issues with Molten Giants in a map, use these and just tell me how you feel about it with the Fury, because I feel like it does very good. Next we have Chimera. Chimera is actually a very solid unit when you have multi-target units. So if you have multiple things that you want to target, I feel like Chimera is very useful. So Chimera has a poison head, which you see in this picture, and then it has a blue head, which is more of a, it deals like elemental lightning. It's like a chain lightning almost, but you can actually turn it into frost lightning as well. So, but that's kind of what it does. So one head shoots poison out, the other head shoots a chain lightning blast. It has decent range, and it has relatively good movement speed and good health. As I said, it's good if you have a big wave coming, because it can AoE down the wave, and it can also target multiple things, which can be very helpful. Because sometimes you are targeting a tank and then something runs up that you want to kill. The Chimera will actually sometimes change target and hit that target, which can be helpful. My favorite talent is probably Corrosive Breath, which is marked as the best on Naf. Poison inflicts twice as much poison, so you get 2 stacks of poison per Corrosive Breath. That's pretty much what that does. You also have Leviathan, which is you gain 10% additional health per deploy, which is up to 30%. It just makes him more of a beefy boy. That can be useful, but I feel like he's a damage dealer, and you're going to probably want to use Corrosive Breath or Frost Shock most of the time. And Frost Shock is a lightning ball. Your lightning ball now applies frost on hit. So the chain lightning little frost, it becomes a frost ball instead of a lightning ball. Essentially, frost will slow down enemies. I tend to like to use Chimera with like Cenarius and Tyrion with the frost shock more than the poison, because I can use it to slow down enemy attacks, and then my healing tends to be very, I don't want to say it tends to be very strong. It tends to be stronger due to the fact that the frost is slowing the enemy down, which means they're dealing less damage, and I'm healing more often. Well, I shouldn't say I'm healing just as often as I would be, but because I'm getting hit less, my heals go farther. So I do like using Frost Shock with Tyrion in particular, and Cenarius, just due to the fact that I can heal my minis. In Frost Shock, throwing him behind like Tyrion in a, maybe a Frostwall Shaman, just means that the heals are going to go a lot farther, and they're going to survive a lot longer. And then the Frost Shock, and just the Corrosive Blast that he does shoot down, will clear most of the minis most of the time. The biggest counter for that is like Huntress, I would say. We're going to move on to the Null Brute here. He essentially serves as a tank. He's relatively the same the same purpose as Hogger. Very similar mini, just a cheaper mini, and he doesn't like stack up over time. He's good for squads because he hits an AoE swipe in front of himself. That being said, he has 3 abilities. One is Pillage, which is he deals siege damage. Siege damage. Can't talk right now. He also has Rabid, which is my favorite. It reduces his cost by 1, and it makes him into a Cycle Mini. I like Cycle Minis. I think they have a place. Sometimes you just need Cycle Minis to drop to clear your hand, and I think making him into a Cycle Mini is really helpful. There's also Thick Hide, which just gives him armor. Again, normally if you have a tank, I usually recommend putting Frostwolf Shaman in your deck, giving it armored, and then it also has a healer behind it. It goes a long way to do so. So yeah. But that's all I really got to say about the Null Brute. He's an AoE clear tank. He's not bad. I'd say he's like Fire Elemental is my choice, which is 4 cost with the Frostwolf Shaman in most decks that don't have the tank, because he does an AoE, like he does a full circle AoE swipe. The Fire Elemental, where the Null Brute only kind of hits an arc in front of him. So we're going to talk about Harpies, then we'll talk about the Murloc Tidehunters. Help me please. I cannot talk right now. And then we'll be talking Prowler, which is very interesting. I like the Prowler. So the Harpies are awesome. Before we even get into it, there are 3 costs, 1 gold cost per Harpy that you drop. They can be easily killed by spells and by ranged units, but if you have a tank with them, they can clean house. Anyways, we'll get into that. So they're fragile flyers that shred. They have a physical attack, and they have 3 talents. So 1 talent is Infectious Swipes. They gain poison. That is the most used talent on the Harpies. I highly recommend that's your first talent. It's very, very useful. Every time they swipe, they give a stack of poison. There's 3 of them. That means 3 stacks of poison. They stack poison extremely fast. So Infectious Swipes is good for that. They just deal a ton of damage. Also, Infectious Swipes, Harpy's physical attack plus, my god, what's his name? The guy, the leader from Blackrock that does fire damage. You have that in your deck. They add fire damage, poison, and their physical damage, and they will tear through units insanely fast, even more so than they already do. I do like using that combo on certain bosses. It just eats them up. Pretty much if they can't clear them with a spell, they'll do a lot of damage. They also have Trinket Collectors that gain the minor trait, and they cost 1 more. Not a big fan of that one. And then they have Talon Die, which is they deal double damage on their first attack. Infectious Swipes is just better. If Talon Dive was like triple damage, it might be, you know, equivalent, but double damage I don't think is enough to make up for the poison damage. Just make sure they don't get hit. That's the biggest strategy for Harpies. Like when you send them out, make sure they're going against like a tank, like a Molten Giant or something like that. If there's any type of ranged unit that's going to hit them, they will lose. So you need something in front of them most of the time, but they'll eat things up as long as there's no AoE around. Next we're going to talk about the Murloc Tidehunters. They're fast cycle minis. The issue with these guys is that they're very, very fragile. They have 3 talents. The best talent is probably Safety Bubble, which is they deploy with a block. Surprisingly, having a block on them, allowing them to take a hit, allows them to usually get a couple attacks off, which means that even if they die, they probably did some damage before they died, and were worth the cost of 2 gold. The other talent that's decent is Careful Aim. They gain 2 range. That just allows them to hit from very far away, which means that they're going to gain more usage. You also have Morlocks, which deploys with 1 additional Murloc. I would say Safety Bubble is generally better because that 1 block is probably better than having the additional Murloc most of the time. Careful Aim is probably the next best because if you put something in front of them, Careful Aim will give them so much range that they shouldn't get hit, which means their fragility doesn't matter. Yeah, for Murlocs, make sure there's a tank in front of them because if there is not, they just die. Safety Bubble is probably your first choice if you want the most consistency out of them, and then probably Careful Aim, and then you build a deck around using them as a support for your tank. If that's pretty much the only way that works. Morlocks, I don't really have anything for you on that one. I would recommend not getting it. So next we're going to talk Prowler. Prowler's a fast-moving 3-cost gold mini. He's a tank. He's pretty solid. He moves pretty quick. He can charge. He essentially has like a mini charge where he runs into something. I do like him. I think he has his uses. So he has a talent called On the Prowl, which is where he gains stealth, and then he stuns the target when attacking from stealth. It's very solid for an opener. He runs up, jumps out of stealth, hits it with the attack, and stuns it, so he gets a couple hits before it hits him back, which allows him to potentially go back into stealth. He has Pack Leader, which grants nearby beast allies 30% additional damage, and then he has Predatory Instincts, which deals double damage to enemies who are more than 75% health. Normally I recommend On the Prowl. Giving him stealth and then allowing him to charge something and stun it is pretty strong. Pack Leader, I actually like Pack Leader more than Predatory Instincts because it gives nearby beast allies 30% additional damage. One of my decks for a while, what I was doing was I was using Prowler with Angry Chickens with Fury, and I was sending them essentially in a wave together, and it actually was relatively efficient and effective. I'm not saying it's the best strategy in the game by any means, because it is not, but I'm saying it does work. There are reasons to use Pack Leader, especially if you're able to build up a decent army and keep them alive. You can Pack Leader and get a bunch of beasts. You will be dealing a lot of damage. But generally on the Prowl, gaining stealth is the best because it just makes the mini good by itself, and most of the time that's good enough. So we're going to talk about Quillbore. Quillbore is a unbound tank, so you can throw him down anywhere you want. He slowly emerges from the ground generally. He's resistant, which means he takes less damage from elemental. He's a cycle mini. He's just cheap, which is always nice. He's a 2-cost mini. He's a good cost mini. Like, he's a good mini for the cost that he is. And he's a tanky boy. That being said, you have a bunch of different talents with him. all of them have niche uses. All of them are pretty decent. Bramble Burst is when he's coming out of the ground, everything around him gets poisoned. This is very good on bosses. When you're doing poison stack builds, you can use the Quillbore to come out of the ground, inflict additional poison stacks on something where you might be losing them to deal enough damage to finish them. It can be really good on phase changes and stuff like that in raid fights. Next you have Tunnel Vision, which he deploys more quickly. That one's, again, has its uses. You can steal chests with it, stuff like that, or you can use it to turn around a wave of minis to focus him while your other minis just destroy them. And then you have Bristleback, which is, it deals a small amount of damage to melee attackers. That used to be a lot better, but it kind of got a little bit of a nerf in a sense. So I normally recommend Bramble Burst and Tunnel Vision. Bramble Burst is better in poison decks where you're assisting with keeping poison stacks on things, and Tunnel Vision is better at decks where you're trying to control the waves from not destroying your main force, like spinning things around to make them face the other direction, like Flame Waker that does a cone attack, or the Null Brute, for example, that does a arcing attack. You turn them around, and then the angry chickens start just eating them from behind while he hits the Quillbore. So now we're going to talk about Raptors. Raptors are a interesting mini. So it starts out at 1 gold for 1 Raptor, then it goes up to 2 for 2 Raptors, and then up to 3. So you can have 6 Raptors at once, but it costs you 6 gold to get there. That being said, they have 3 talents. Strength in numbers is probably the best, which is it deals 10% more for each Raptor nearby, so, you know, 60% damage at full. Fast Food, which is on kill, heal amount of damage. That has uses as well. And then you have Motivation. Gain Bloodlust while a chest or gold vein is nearby. Not as useful. I would say Strength in numbers is probably the best, then Fast Food, then Motivation, in that order. I actually agree with Naf on this one. So, Raptors are an interesting mini. I don't highly recommend them out of like the minis that you can get. I would say Quillbore, Prowler, Chimera, Angry Chickens, and Null Brutes have more, and Harpies, sorry, Harpies as well, have far more use than Raptors normally do. So I'm not going to go too much into Raptor strategies. If you guys come up with one, that's fine, but I'm just, tends to be more for new players. I would stay away from the Raptors. For Spiderlings, they are 2 gold cycle minis. They have poison, and the issue with them is they're vulnerable, and they take additional damage from elemental damage. So they have a weakness, which is never a good thing. They have 3 talents. They have 1 which is Envenom, which is they deal twice as much damage with their poison. You also have Bloated Carapace, which is when they explode on death, they poison all nearby enemies, which means you get 3 stacks of poison essentially when all 3 of them explode. And then you have Frostbite, which is you gain frost. Surprisingly, for the mini, all of them are good talents. Again, I actually agree with Naf on this one. So the Envenom, which is the deal to twice as many poison damage stacks, is probably the best. Bloated Carapace is probably the next best. And then Frost is probably the worst. That being said, they're all not bad, but I would definitely try to get Envenom first, then Bloated Carapace, and then Frostbite. I do like Frost. I think it has uses. If these guys weren't vulnerable, they would probably be a lot better. Unfortunately, the vulnerability makes them pretty weak. And last, and completely the least, we're going to talk about Vultures in this. Vultures are, unfortunately, not that great. So, they're a 2-cost mini. They're flying, and they summon more Vultures when they kill a target, which is interesting. So you have different talents with them. You have Tendon Rip, which is attack enemies. When you attack enemies, they become dazed for 3 seconds. That just slows them down so they can't escape. You also have Feeding Frenzy, which the flock gains Bloodlust for 5 seconds when spawning a new Vulture. That's good for increasing your damage output and making more Vultures and getting Bloodlust to get to targets quicker. And then you have Migration, which is all additional Vultures spawn at your base. Interestingly enough, because they're so fragile, none of the talents are really good. I would say Migration actually is probably your best talent, simply because when you spawn the Vulture at your base, at least it's going to fly somewhere and potentially go down a lane where there's maybe a melee unit where it's just going to beat up on it for free. But unfortunately, they just tend to die very quickly. Like, a ranged unit's going to one-shot them out of the sky. Any spell pretty much clears them. Like, they don't get enough value even for the 1 cost that they are worth. They're worth nothing. I mean, the 1 gold is not worth the gold you're paying to get them. At best, you're using them to cycle through your deck. That'd be my best use for these guys, is to put a 1 cost to cycle. The issue with that is, if you're going that route, the best thing to put in your deck at that point would be probably the Defias Bandits, because at least they have some use. Anyways, that's the end of Beast Minis. I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope this was helpful. I am going to just jump into Undead right now real quick, and we're going to talk about the Dire Batlings and the Headless Horsemen. They are new this patch. This is Halloween time, and I'm just going to talk real quickly about them, even though they are not beasts. I think they are interesting units. So I have played with the Dire Batlings at this point, and they are super fun. I actually think for 2 costs they are useful. They have their uses. They're a cheap cycle mini. They're fast. It produces 6 of them. They have Detect, which means they can attack stealth units, which is a nice little bonus. They have 3 talents. They have Midnight's Call, which is on kill they gain stealth. That's super good because it just allows them to keep going and attacking things. Soundbite emits a additional damage to a nearby enemy, so there has to be 2 enemies for this talent to work. But essentially, I think it sends out a sonic wave that's about 60 to 50% of their damage to another target. Obviously, that can do a lot when you have 5 or 6 of them hitting 1 target if they're not being killed, and you're just hitting another target for additional damage. And then you have Guano Happens, which is essentially, while they're in the air fighting, they drop poison randomly, which anything walking through it gets poisoned by the poop that they're producing. That's good in a poison stack deck, honestly. That being said, Dire Batlings have uses. They're good for backing up forces. You just have to watch out for AoE clears that, if they have it like a Pyromancer or something like that, they're going to be immediately cleared. That's a good counter to them. But they are a relatively good unit because they're cheap. You can throw them down and potentially clear out a good amount of melee units in a push before they can really get something there to help defend them. And now we're going to talk about the Headless Horseman. He's a fast-moving, poisonous, cavalry, so he's quick. He's on a horse. He has elemental damage with his sword, and he has poisonous damage when he throws his head. He randomly will throw a head during his attack. He seems to be a pretty beefy boy. We don't have access to him really yet. He's next week on Wednesday. I look forward to using him. He has some really cool looking talents. So let's go over his talents. You have Night Watch, which is remain at deploy location and attack enemies who approach. I'll have to see how that works, but if he sits there and doesn't really leave, that would be really interesting. But normally how it works with like the dragon and stuff is once he gets hit or engages, he then goes. But you could, potentially stack up a couple Headless Horsemen at a defensive location, and then they'll go out and attack, which would be interesting. You also have Decapitate, which is on kill. He gains Bloodlust. That's just a solid buff. Bloodlusting for 5 seconds on kill is just a buff. Being able to remain at your deploy location, which means you can put him somewhere where he's going to be useful later, and potentially get a little army going. An extra little boost on that lane can be very good for control, which is very good. And then you have Nay Death Experience, which is at 40% health. He heals back to 80% health and stuns nearby enemies. The ability only has 1 charge, which means you can't heal twice, but that just gives him another set of health. It doesn't say that he's armored or anything, so I could see, like, giving him, again, he's fast, so that he would outrun the Shaman, but, like, throwing a Shaman down, giving him armored, and then setting him loose with Nay Death Experience seems pretty strong. because he's probably not going to die very easily, and he has a lot of control with the stun, throwing a poison, pumpkin. Yeah, I can see him being very good. The issue is that he does throw a poison pumpkin, and so he alternates between attacks, and sometimes alternating between attacks can be a detriment. But we'll see what happens. He is a 5-cost mini. I could see him being very good. Again, 5 cost is steep. Normally, I don't like to put too many 5 costs in my deck. I tend to try to stay 1 or 2 5 or higher cost at most, and then normally when I do that, a lot of my other minis are like 2 or 3 cost minis. I try to keep my deck more balanced around a 3.0 through a 4.5 cost, if possible. Anyways, we'll see what happens with this mini, because I look forward to using him. And I will catch you guys in the next one. Enjoy some Rumble. Later, guys.